may I invite Nishad, who is the Director of Risk Practice, Risk and Technology at Deloitte, who will be joining us to moderate this session. And along with him, we have two wonderful luminaries. We have Guy Charpenter, who is again a luminary from the area of fraud risk management and who has been doing some wonderful work at MasterCard. And along with him, we have Stuart. Stuart is another great advisor, luminary, and been a career banker with banks like Scotia, TD, and others. And he is going to share with us some very interesting insights across these organizations, both from the US and Canadian perspective.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Babu, for the warm invite and welcome. And so I'm a GRC technology specialist. I've been in this for a long time now. As Babu mentioned, our focus today is Agentic AI and Agentic AI in banking. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to both Stuart and Guy.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm Stuart Davis. I've been in Canada 13 years. It's a global CAMLO for BMO and then Scotiabank, and then advised TD on some of their AML challenges. My mandates have included fraud, all things business process automation for efficiency in AML, and now I'm running my own independent consulting firm and looking at all types of things, including Agentic AI. So happy to be here and happy to be part of the future where we're going.
Thanks, Stuart. Guy?
Great, thank you. Similar to Stuart, I'm a consultant as well with MasterCard. And the areas that I specialize in tend to be in operations and compliance, working with primarily our customers, but ultimately with all sorts of entities on a global basis. My role being situated in Canada, but ultimately leading our global practice in consulting. And so topics like agentic commerce, AI, the impacts that has not only in payments but other places are things that I talk day in, day out to customers about, and specifically on how to embed new technologies within back office operations, in particular things like risk, and helping many of those back office operations go beyond the reactive, which is not in my shop, to actually embrace and support the development and innovation that is taking place.
Thanks, Guy. So in this evolving world, right, and it's changing really fast, one of the key things that we need to address in financial services is how does it affect, or how does that change the risk landscape as well as the decision making that goes behind that. So we have really moved from human in the loop, that was probably a term a while ago, now to human on the loop. So we are more of overseeing what those agents are doing for you. So when AI agents start making autonomous decisions, like maybe authorizing a high-speed payment, right, or flagging an AML pattern, how does it change the nature of operational risk in financial services? How do you start viewing risk differently? And how do you see accountability and decision-making shift? Take a leaf out of what Della said before of responsibility and accountability, and I'd like to learn more from you.
First and foremost, when we stand back and we look at how fast things are changing, we have to say, where do we want to be in the future? Because it is quite overwhelming if you just look at the onslaught of what's coming. And from an operational risk perspective in particular, I'm sort of glad I'm not sitting on the banking side any longer in that direct line of fire, because the risks that are now coming from external are going to hockey stick, I think, in acceleration, especially as agentic AI agents become more and more intelligent and capable of doing things at high speed that we had to deal with at slow to moderate speed in the past, especially around fraud and account opening, synthetic identities, and things of that sort. At the same time, operationally, we're looking to transform our own processes, save money, be more efficient, make ourselves more innovative. And it requires this new talent pool of people that can think in terms of prompt engineering and machine learning. There's many types of AI, but the agent-driven AI, the Agentic AI, you really need this kind of concept of how do I ask the right question? This is something we all learn in university is, are you asking the right question? Well, if you're not asking the right question, you're not going to get the right output. And really figuring out how to do that. And then you add on top of it the point Della made about we've got to be able to control and oversee this. So just like we've had in compliance for years, the checkers checking the checkers, now we've got the agentic checkers checking the agentic agents checking the checkers. At the same time, we still have humans in the loop operating. And what do we need to check? How do we need to validate it? And I'll leave that point with just one recent example. In the US, the OCC, I think it was the OCC or the Fed, just fined a bank for turning on their AI agents to run their AML program, and they just let them go. And no supervision, no oversight. And they got a hefty penalty here and have made global news. So it's not a good thing for your reputation. So being the first out of the box with some of this, you got to be very well governed, and even thinking about how to govern this ecosystem is quite challenging. It requires a whole nother level of thinking. And I've been at this business a long time, and it's challenging for me.
Thanks, Stuart. How do you see, Guy, the accountability and decision making shifting in this new landscape?
Effectively, the key, I think, in terms of this is the collaboration between players within organizations and within the space in which these type of agents are interacting. And I think if you kind of look at AI and agents, agentic commerce in particular, based on my payments background, this is something that not much sooner than beginning of last year was when we started even using the term. Right. And I think what you've seen since that time is literally building the boat as it's leaving the harbor. But it's an important work because essentially it creates the certainty that is necessary to be able to realize the promise of this innovation. And its foundation is things like trust, security, interoperability, right? Because everybody's building their own version of this. There's several different types, but as long as it's embedded within that is effectively the trust that people can adopt this with certainty of safety, security, that they can realize the convenience of the innovation. Those things will happen as long as we bake it in. And I think the primary shift in my mind that I see when I'm talking about this to clients, and it's not a North American thing, it's not a Canada, US thing, it's a global thing, is that you have to change the mindset of the role. And it was very well put by the earlier speaker. Effectively, you have to change the mindset of operations and operations risk from being the domain of no, to effectively, this is happening. How can we support the organization in being able to put this innovation in front of customers? Because it's not a question of whether customers want it. We know they want it. So it's how do you do it and do it responsibly to deliver that safety, security, and trust that's necessary in every interaction.
That's the fair, good point. It also brings us to another piece in there, which is potential gaps. right? AI safety is one of the pillars in AI governance. But what we are seeing is, in your experience, what do you see is being exposed now by agentic AI coming into the loop? So what are those real unfiltered gaps that is becoming exposed in our current resiliency and security frameworks, because now agentic AI is in the picture?
Yeah, Stuart, I'd like to take that one on because I have a strong, passionate view on this. And I think what's being exposed is that as payments or as interactions and transactions of every description have become more and more technical, what's being exposed now at a faster and faster pace is that as an industry, our literacy in how these things work, it isn't where it should be to be able to have those really robust conversations about how do we put in controls to counter the risks of having an agent doing, fill in the blank. And that literacy is really critical to establish it, to be able to realize both the innovation and avoid the pitfalls that come, that will come. Because, my experience in being in risk management, not only at MasterCard, but before when I was within banks, is that those that wish to abuse or profit fraudulently are the fastest adopters. So we have to really deal with that, or we're going to experience impacts on customers. We're going to impact their trust on the products and services that we deliver, and we're going to impede innovation if we do not.
Stuart, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think it exposes our vulnerabilities just as humans and leaders, right? How about change management? Are we doing a good enough job with change management at this pace? What else is changing right now? Open banking, RTR, stable coins, digital wallets, digital identity. Just one of those alone is probably a lot for an organization. And here we go at and the speed. The speed is accelerating quickly with this. So I forecasted a day when banks are going to have to be dealing with, 5,000 accounts opened in one day and only 50 of those are real, right? Or 50 are real and maybe 50 are agent accounts that are legally authorized to act on behalf of people. And how are you going to sort the good from the bad? How do you know think of this is a corporate identity effectively for this, or an entity for these agents to operate. And so they're operating maybe as a corporate entity, but how do you authenticate that? How do you hold them accountable? That's what we see coming over the horizon. At the same time, we're still struggling with what are we going to do for open banking? What are we going to do for RTR? And we all know that in every country, when RTR has been introduced, there's just massive fraud opportunity. So our ability to deal with the change, I think, is a huge vulnerability, in addition to the great points Guy was making.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it gets me back onto my sort of soapbox. But, obviously looking at me, not my colleague behind me, I don't know where that guy came from, but I've been in the industry a long time and very comfortable within risk management shops. But in a digital age, the world comes at you faster and faster. In a traditional risk management shop, you rely heavily on detection. Detection relies on experience. That works in an analog world. You have the time, the space to develop the experience and build the countermeasures. But in a digital space, you need to be able to not rely on that. You need to be able to rely on things like you say, authentication, validation of data elements that are coming through, and being able to identify those real time and have strategies to mitigate that are equally real time. And that is really getting to the transformational aspect that we really have to embrace the digital age to be able to succeed in it.
Thank you both for that. With every opportunity that's coming up with AI, there is obviously the risk side of it as well that we need to manage. I think that brings me to another interesting thought about innovation. What do you think? So we're essentially seeing there's a lot of talk about guardrails and controls, but putting a guardrail around an AI is like a fence around a tornado. It's pretty difficult to manage, and the kind of controls that you need there it's just multiplying every other day. From an innovation or future-looking perspective, what do we actually think that we would need to see to have effective governance? Governance as code, policy as code, whatever that is, or is it a smart AI monitoring another AI governing AI, whatever that is? Just some thoughts if you have on them.
Yeah, I see a couple things on the horizon in terms of innovation, and this sort of aligns with all the points you've heard from the speakers tonight, and that is the need for an orchestration and governance layer. And just think of these androids that we're going to have walking around in 5 to 10 years. That's on the horizon, right? Okay, now, if we're all in a theater and I have this idea of jumping up, yelling fire, that's going to cause panic, and I would be held accountable for doing that falsely, right? So I have a governance mechanism in my brain that says, hey, that's funny, but don't do it because you're going to have some problems down the road. How do we build that governance layer in this next generation of smart technology, whether it's androids walking around, whether it's if an android gets shoved, is it going to shove back? What are we going to see? Well, the same applies for agents too. OpenClaw is already doing some very interesting things, right? And it's got a lot of liberty and freedom. And one of the interesting things is it's costing people a lot of money. Once they turn it on, they figured out, it did all this overnight. Now I got a $500 charge all of a sudden pending. But so the ecosystem is entirely driven by a model which I don't think is sustainable today in terms of LLM environments and agentic AI. And it's changing so fast that I think we're going to see a lot of fairly fast fails, and we already have, but I think we're going to see even more. I don't know if this tokenization approach, which is being used for credits and processing, is going to be an enduring viable component as a point of change on the horizon. And then within the banking environments in particular, model governance like we've used for years in fraud and AML to make sure that the design is good, the effectiveness is good, and the performance is maintained and monitored. That's a very specialized skill set that requires independent validation. And it's been when I was in the banking in the US, some of the most rigorous exams where I'm sitting in a room with, 3 or 4 PhDs arguing about, Z-scores and stuff. And, how prevalent is that type of knowledge set, right? To really build the required levels of stability and trust, to use Guy's term, in the system. And so I think we're going to be forced, in a term that I've used very often, away from probabilistic AI to what I call deterministic AI, where in deterministic AI, every relationship, every connection is known and approved as valid. It's not based on a probability score. So think in the early days of compute, if you're old enough as I am, what did we have? We had a CPU, like a 3084 or something like that, and then we had a math coprocessor. And then ultimately we started getting the graphic card. Well, the graphics card was what was introducing this probabilistic dimension, right? And some of the math coprocessing. But the early chips were very deterministic. And I think we're going to have a migration in the banking sector, in financial payments, much more to this deterministic world of of AI because you can't just have random outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Guy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on.
Yeah, no, cool, quite a few. And Stuart, I think I agree with you on a lot of that. I think if you look at the different structures that are being introduced, a lot of them are being built, most of them are being built in collaboration. So, where you have certain structures that you have these collective groups of different companies and that forming associations that introduce standards, and leverage things like tokens, blockchain, all of these things being tools within the structures and how they go together. Those are all important pieces, but from an actual usability standpoint, you have to look at, okay, a token needs to be provisioned. Mm-hmm. And at the provisioning stage, what type of authentication are you using? And are you using, as you mentioned, some kind of risk-based model to authenticate, or are you actually authenticating the customer in a persistent manner, right? Mm-hmm. So effectively, you're able to bind, let's say, the device that they're using to their identity and then recognize that device as it comes through. Same thing with the agent. How do I recognize a legitimate agent versus an agent that is rogue? Yeah. How do I protect the data within that agent? Things like personal identifiable information, card information, things like that. Those are all things that are being done now in those groups. And it's hard work, but it's necessary work for us to be able to realize this innovation. And I can say that if we grow the literacy, if we have these kinds of robust discussions about, well, what about this? And we think through them in a collaborative manner, not in a combative, but in a collaborative way, I think we will be able to realize this. I think that in the digital age, we have the tools to be able to be on the other side of abuse if we want to adopt them.
Thank you, Guy. So certainly a lot of room for innovation. These things, as I said, evolve daily or hourly even. OpenClaw is a good example of how it came out of nowhere and suddenly influenced so much. So as you talked about innovation and, to be able to identity, authentication, all those kind of things, I want to get your view on what you would think would be a future view of a control framework or infrastructure in a banking organization where, you may be looking at, going back to OpenClaw, it may be your customer's AI agent talking to a bank's AI agent to look at what's my mortgage rate going to be, right? It's not, to your point, two agents talking to each other. How would your control framework or infrastructure look like?
I'll start off with this little story. I got a phone call the other day, and it was clearly an AI agent calling me with regard to a purchase I just made prior, trying to upsell me on something. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I had a personal adverse reaction to talking to an AI agent computer. I don't like that. I've always enjoyed talking with people, right? And so cultural values and perceptions are going to be huge as we move forward in this. And we will have to, I think, be forced to adapt to various consumer preferences. Don't call me, don't email me, have been the old ones. Now the new ones are going to be, don't use an agent, right? Don't use this or that. I think we're going to be faced with these new compliance requirements in the long run around that. But in terms of governing this process, we as bankers and risk experts and AI experts will have to figure out how to deal with all of it, because the world is going to be all of it. And I think one of the best points made tonight was liability. who's going to own the risk associated with this? It's not well defined. And what we're going to see is a world where this stuff lands and everybody's having to deal with it, and we have no regulatory framework, we have no legal framework for it to operate effectively. I mean, we've had crypto for years, and now we just got the Genius Act. We've had and the stablecoin model law, and I'm working on the real world asset tokenization model law right now. But that stuff already exists, right? So the law will lag, the change, the controls, the governance processes will lag, and hopefully we won't get destroyed or lose a lot of money waiting on the system to catch up.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts, Guy, on the controls framework infrastructure from a payments perspective?
I think the controls themselves, they're largely in development. And as we look at this, there is frameworks that are quite advanced, very task specific. And I think that there's going to be out of that an adoption that can be made of a standard.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going as an industry, is into standards that aren't owned by any single entity, and that they are interoperable and that they are effectively global. I tend to say this to clients all the time. What is the difference in distance and time between Toronto and London? It's one click. It's not measured in miles anymore. It's measured in milliseconds. So if you have a mindset that there can be a standard for any one company or any one country, I think that's a thing of the past.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Guy, and thank you, Stuart. I think that was a good discussion on where we are now, where we're going towards in terms of agentic AI. We have moved on from having conversational AI to having your AI agent crafting mails for you, to actually giving your credit card to your AI agent to do your shopping. Only the AI agent might end up buying the whole store. So there is a ways to go for us.
Not if there's permissions.
Obviously, yes.
A key part of the AI standards being developed within payments.
There's the standards, the runtime controls, the enterprise assurance, all of which needs to go lock in step with these innovations, with these developments, for us to efficiently use AI in our day-to-day life, and banking is very important in that. So thank you, Guy and Stuart, for your time and for the insights.
I to AI, the intelligent finance fraternity.